Billionaire's son falls in love with the deaf janitor. His family's reaction shocked everyone. The silence in the marble-floored lobby of Blackstone Industries was about to be shattered by words that would echo through the halls of privilege for generations to come. Alexander Blackstone, heir to a $3.2 billion empire, had just made the announcement that would either destroy his family's dynasty or redefine what love truly means. "I'm going to marry her," Alexander declared, his voice carrying across the opulent boardroom where 3 generations of Blackstones sat in stunned disbelief. "I'm going to marry Maya Santos, and there's nothing any of you can say to change my mind." But what the Blackstone family didn't understand, what their wealth and privilege had blinded them to, was that the woman they dismissed as just the deaf janitor possessed a strength, intelligence, and dignity that spoke louder than all their objections combined. Maya Santos had been cleaning the offices of Blackstone Industries for 3 years, invisible to everyone except the young man who had fallen hopelessly in love with her silent grace. Tonight, when a privileged heir chose love over fortune, the silent woman who stole his heart was about to speak louder than all his family's protests. The collision between the world of inherited wealth and genuine human connection was about to create the most beautiful chaos Manhattan high society had ever witnessed. The Blackstone Industries Tower rose from Manhattan's financial district like a monument to capitalist supremacy, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun like polished gold. For 3 years, Maya Santos had entered this temple of wealth through the service entrance, carrying her cleaning supplies and moving through its corridors with the invisible efficiency that made her indispensable and overlooked simultaneously. Maya Santos, 28, had been born profoundly deaf, but she had never considered her deafness a disability. In her world, a world of visual communication, tactile connection, and profound observation, she saw things that hearing people missed. She read emotions in facial expressions, understood intentions through body language, and communicated with a depth that transcended spoken words. Alexander Blackstone, 30, was everything his billionaire father had groomed him to be. Harvard MBA, fluent in 5 languages, heir apparent to an empire that spanned technology, real estate, and international finance. Yet despite his privileged education and unlimited opportunities, he had never encountered anyone who communicated as powerfully as Maya did through her silence. Their love story had begun 18 months earlier with a simple act of kindness. Alexander, working late on a particularly stressful acquisition deal, had been frustrated by his inability to locate crucial documents. Maya, cleaning the office next to his, had noticed his distress and quietly organized his scattered papers with an efficiency that spoke of genuine intelligence. When Alexander looked up to thank her, Maya smiled and pointed to the now organized documents, then gave him a thumbs up and an encouraging nod. Something in that moment, her genuine concern for a stranger's stress, her intuitive understanding of what he needed, had touched Alexander in a way that no debutante ball or society gala ever had. From that night forward, Alexander began staying late intentionally, not for business, but to spend those quiet evening hours learning to communicate with Maya. She taught him basic sign language using a small notebook she carried, and he discovered that her silence contained more meaningful conversation than he'd experienced in 30 years of privileged social interaction. Maya's intelligence revealed itself gradually. She had a degree in graphic design from a community college, spoke fluent Spanish and English through reading and writing, and had an artistic eye that Alexander found captivating. Her cleaning job was temporary, a way to support herself while building a freelance design business that she ran from her small Brooklyn apartment. "Why don't you tell people about your design work?" Alexander had written in their shared notebook one evening. Maya's response had been profound in its simplicity. "People see the uniform first. They decide who I am before they know who I am. It's easier to be invisible and prove myself through work." Alexander had been stunned by the wisdom in her words. In his world, people saw his name first and decided who he was based on his inheritance. Maya had achieved something he never had. She was valued purely for her character and capabilities. Their relationship deepened through written conversations, shared lunches in empty conference rooms, and weekend walks through Central Park where Maya would point out architectural details and artistic elements that Alexander had never noticed, despite living in Manhattan his entire life. Maya's silence became Alexander's sanctuary. In her presence, he didn't need to perform the role of billionaire heir. He could simply be Alex, a man who was falling in love with a woman whose capacity for love transcended the need for spoken words. The transformation in Alexander was remarkable. His family noticed that he seemed calmer, more focused, and genuinely happy for the first time in years. What they didn't know was that their son and heir was learning sign language, spending his evenings in Brooklyn coffee shops, and discovering that the most meaningful conversations of his life were happening without a single spoken word. Maya had never told Alexander about her background, how she had grown up in a family that saw her deafness as a tragedy to be hidden rather than a difference to be celebrated. How she had learned to navigate a hearing world that often treated her as intellectually inferior because she communicated differently. How she had built a quiet strength that came from proving herself daily in a society that underestimated her. For 18 months, their love had grown in secret, nurtured in the spaces between worlds, the empty offices after hours, the quiet corners of public parks, the small restaurants where they could write notes to each other without judgment. But tonight, Alexander could no longer bear the secrecy. Tonight, he was ready to tell his family that he had found the woman he wanted to marry, and that she happened to be someone they had never truly seen, despite her presence in their building for 3 years. "Father," Alexander said as he entered the family's private dining room in their Fifth Avenue penthouse, "I need to talk to you about something important." Charles Blackstone, 67, looked up from his Wall Street Journal with the expression of a man accustomed to solving problems with money and influence. "What's on your mind, son?" "I'm in love," Alexander announced. "I've been in love for over a year, and I want to marry her." Charles smiled indulgently. "Well, it's about time. Which family is she from? The Ashfords? The Whitmore girl? I always thought she had her eye on you." "Her name is Maya Santos," Alexander replied. "She works at our company." Charles's smile faltered slightly. "Santos? I don't recognize the name. What department?" Alexander took a deep breath. "She's part of our custodial staff, and she's deaf." The silence that followed was so profound that Alexander could hear his own heartbeat. Charles stared at his son as if he had just announced his intention to join a monastery. "You're joking," Charles said finally. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Charles stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "Alexander, I understand that young men sometimes develop attachments to women they encounter, but marriage? To the cleaning lady? A deaf cleaning lady?" "Her name is Maya," Alexander said firmly, "and her deafness isn't a limitation, it's simply how she experiences the world. She's intelligent, talented, kind, and she sees me as a person rather than a bank account." "This is ridiculous," Charles snapped. "You've been seduced by some gold-digging immigrant who's probably coached on exactly how to manipulate wealthy men." Alexander's face flushed with anger. "Father, you don't know anything about her. Maya didn't even know my last name for the first 6 months we were getting to know each other. She fell in love with Alex, not Alexander Blackstone. And when did she discover your identity? I'm sure her affections deepened considerably at that point." "Actually," Alexander replied with quiet dignity, "when she found out who I really was, she tried to end our relationship. She said she didn't want to be seen as someone who was using me for money. It took weeks to convince her that my feelings were genuine." Charles began pacing the room like a caged predator. Alexander, think about what you're saying. Our family has built an empire over 4 generations. We have responsibilities to our shareholders, our employees, our social position. You can't throw all of that away for some romantic fantasy. I'm not throwing anything away, Alexander replied. I'm choosing to build something real with someone who loves me for who I am, not what I represent. If this story of love transcending social barriers is already touching your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because the family's reaction to Maya is about to reveal the true meaning of dignity and worth. The Blackstone family emergency meeting was called for the following evening, convened in the same boardroom where billion-dollar deals were negotiated and corporate empires were built or destroyed. Charles had summoned not just Alexander, but his wife Victoria, his daughter Catherine, and even his brother Robert, the family's legal counsel. This wasn't just a family discussion, this was a corporate intervention. Alexander, Victoria Blackstone began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had chaired charity galas and society events for 3 decades. Your father has told me about this situation with the cleaning woman. Her name is Maya, Alexander repeated for what felt like the 100th time in 24 hours. Of course, dear, Victoria continued with the dismissive tone she used when addressing service staff. Maya, I'm sure she's a lovely girl, but you have to understand the position this puts our family in. Catherine, Alexander's younger sister, leaned forward. Alex, I've seen her around the building. She seems nice enough, but come on, she's deaf. She's working class. She's probably not even documented properly. Do you realize what the media would do with this story? What I realize, Alexander replied, his voice growing stronger with each word, is that I've found someone who makes me genuinely happy for the first time in my adult life, and my family's first concern is public relations. Robert Blackstone, the family attorney, opened a leather portfolio. Alexander, I've done some preliminary research on Miss Santos. She's here legally, work visa, clean background check, but financially speaking, she has student loans, minimal savings, and her earning potential is limited. Are you suggesting she's marrying me for money? Alexander asked. I'm suggesting, Robert replied carefully, that the financial disparity creates certain vulnerabilities. We would need an ironclad prenuptial agreement, obviously. Alexander stood up abruptly. Uncle Robert, with all due respect, you can take your prenuptial agreement and— Alexander, Charles barked, sit down. We're trying to protect you. From what? From love? From happiness? From someone who actually cares about me rather than my inheritance? Victoria tried a softer approach. Darling, no one is questioning your feelings, but marriage is about more than emotions. It's about compatibility, shared backgrounds, common social circles. How would you even communicate with her family? How would she fit into our world? Alexander's response was quiet but devastating. Mother, Maya communicates better without words than most people in our social circle do with entire vocabularies. And as for fitting into our world, maybe our world needs to expand rather than expecting her to shrink. Charles had heard enough. Alexander, I'm going to be direct. If you proceed with this marriage, there will be consequences. Financial consequences, professional consequences, social consequences. Are you threatening to disinherit me? I'm explaining reality, Charles replied. Our board of directors, our shareholders, our business partners, they expect certain standards from the Blackstone family. Marrying the cleaning lady would be seen as unstable judgment. Alexander looked around the room at the faces of his family, people who had given him every material advantage but had apparently never taught him the difference between worth and wealth. Let me tell you what I've learned about Maya Santos, Alexander said, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised even him. She supports her elderly parents in Guatemala by sending them half her salary every month. She's putting herself through a graduate program in visual communications while working full-time. She volunteers on weekends teaching sign language to children at a community center in Queens. He paused, looking directly at each family member. She has never asked me for anything except honesty. She's never shown interest in my money, my connections, or my social status. When I told her I loved her, she cried. Not because she had caught a rich husband, but because she was afraid I was too good for her. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Alexander, those are lovely qualities, but what, Mother? But she doesn't come from the right family? But she doesn't have the right accent? But she communicates with her hands instead of her voice? Catherine tried to interject. Alex, it's not about prejudice. It's about practicality. How would she handle business dinners, charity galas, board meetings? Alexander smiled, and for the first time since the meeting began, it was a genuine smile. Catherine, last month Maya attended a gallery opening with me. She couldn't hear the artist's presentation, but she understood the emotional impact of every piece better than anyone in the room. She spent 20 minutes discussing color theory and composition with the curator, in writing, and gave him insights that changed his entire understanding of the exhibition. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. She doesn't need to handle our world. She improves it simply by being in it. Charles played his final card. Alexander, I've arranged for you to meet Jennifer Ashford next week. Her family owns the largest shipping consortium on the East Coast. She's educated, accomplished, from good stock. Stop. Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. Just stop. I'm not a prize bull being bred for optimal offspring. I'm a man who has found love, and I'm going to marry the woman I love. Even if it costs you everything? Robert asked. Alexander turned back to face his family. Uncle Robert, let me ask you something. In all your legal experience, all your financial planning, all your corporate negotiations, have you ever found anything worth more than genuine love? The room fell silent. Robert, despite his decades of legal cynicism, found himself unable to answer. I'm going to marry Maya Santos, Alexander continued. If that means I lose my inheritance, so be it. If it means I'm excluded from family business, I'll find another career. If it means society looks down on us, we'll create our own society. Victoria was crying now, though she was trying to hide it. Alexander, you're our son. We love you. We just want what's best. Then trust my judgment, Alexander interrupted gently. Trust that I'm capable of recognizing what's best for my own life. Charles had been silent for several minutes, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. Finally, he spoke. Bring her to dinner tomorrow night. Everyone in the room turned to stare at him. Father? Catherine asked. If Alexander is determined to proceed with this relationship, then we should meet the woman who has apparently captured our son's heart so completely. Alexander felt a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. Father, you should know that Maya doesn't speak verbally. She communicates through sign language and writing. Then we'll adapt, Charles said gruffly. But I want to see for myself what kind of woman would make my son willing to sacrifice everything he's worked for. Alexander nodded slowly. I'll ask her, but I need to know that you'll treat her with respect. She'll be our guest, Victoria said, regaining her composure. Whatever our concerns, she'll be treated with appropriate courtesy. As the family meeting ended and members began filing out, Alexander remained by the window, looking out at the city where Maya was probably finishing her evening classes, unaware that her life was about to change dramatically. Charles approached his son. Alexander, I hope you understand that this isn't just about family approval. There will be challenges, social, professional, personal, that you've never had to consider. I understand, Father, but I also understand that some challenges are worth facing for the right person. Charles nodded slowly. Then I suppose we'll find out tomorrow night whether Maya Santos is the right person. The family dinner is about to happen. Will Maya's grace and intelligence win over the Blackstone family? If you're rooting for love to triumph over prejudice, smash that like button and share this with someone who believes in the power of authentic connection. The Blackstone family penthouse had been transformed for the evening's dinner, with Victoria sparing no expense to create an atmosphere of intimidating elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across Italian marble floors, while priceless artwork adorned walls that had witnessed 4 generations of power dinners and society gatherings. Maya Santos stood in her small Brooklyn apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror with a mixture of determination and terror. Alexander had prepared her for this evening as much as possible, but nothing could truly ready someone for walking into the lion's den of New York's financial elite. She wore a simple black dress that she had purchased with 3 months of savings, elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without trying to compete with inherited wealth. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened a small necklace, the only jewelry she owned that had belonged to her grandmother. Alexander arrived to pick her up at 7 o'clock, and the look on his face when he saw her confirmed that she had chosen correctly. He was nervous too, she realized, which somehow made her feel less alone. "You look beautiful," he signed, his sign language now fluent after 18 months of dedicated study. "I'm terrified," Maya signed back honestly. Alexander took her hands in his. "They're going to love you, and if they don't, it won't change anything between us." The ride to the penthouse was silent, except for the city sounds filtering through the limousine windows. Maya watched Alexander's face, reading the tension in his jaw, the worry in his eyes. She reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she wrote in their shared notebook. "For what?" "For choosing me," she wrote. "For seeing me, for loving me enough to fight for us." Alexander felt his heart break and mend simultaneously. This woman, this incredible, strong, beautiful woman, still couldn't fully believe that someone would choose her simply for who she was. The Blackstone penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a Fifth Avenue building with panoramic views of Central Park and Manhattan's skyline. When Alexander and Maya entered, the family was assembled in the main drawing room like a receiving line of aristocratic judgment. Charles Blackstone stepped forward first, his bearing formal but not unfriendly. Maya had prepared for this moment, and she extended her hand for a handshake while maintaining direct eye contact, a sign of respect and confidence that Charles noted immediately. "Mr. Blackstone," Maya said aloud, her voice carrying the unique cadence of someone who had learned to speak without hearing. "Thank you for inviting me to your home." Charles was surprised by several things simultaneously. Maya spoke verbally. Her English was perfect despite her accent, and her bearing was that of someone comfortable with her own dignity. Victoria stepped forward next, her society training taking over. "Maya, dear, welcome. Alexander has told us so much about you." Maya smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackstone. Your home is beautiful." Catherine hung back slightly, still processing her assumptions about what this evening would entail. She had expected someone who seemed diminished by the grandeur of their world. Instead, Maya moved through the opulent space with quiet confidence, appreciating the art and architecture without being overwhelmed by them. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, with place settings that represented more wealth than Maya had seen in her lifetime. But rather than being intimidated, she found herself genuinely curious about the stories behind the family heirlooms and artwork. "Alexander tells me you studied graphic design," Victoria said, making conversation. Maya nodded and pulled out her phone, showing Victoria examples of her work, logos she had designed for small businesses, promotional materials for community organizations, and artistic pieces that demonstrated genuine talent. "These are quite good," Victoria admitted, her surprise evident. "Thank you," Maya replied. "I specialize in visual communication, creating meaning without words. Charles leaned forward. That's an interesting perspective. In business, we often rely too heavily on verbal presentation when visual impact can be more powerful. Maya smiled and began writing in her notebook, then showed Charles her response. Exactly. Sometimes the most important messages are communicated through what people see and feel, not what they hear. As the evening progressed, the family began to understand what Alexander had been trying to tell them. Maya wasn't diminished by her deafness. She was enhanced by it. Her observation skills were remarkable, her insights were profound, and her ability to connect with people transcended the need for spoken words. Catherine found herself genuinely engaged when Maya began discussing color theory and its psychological impact on marketing. Robert discovered that Maya had innovative ideas about visual presentation of legal documents. Even Victoria was charmed by Maya's stories about her volunteer work with deaf children. "Maya," Charles said during dessert, "Alexander mentioned that you support your family in Guatemala." Maya nodded, writing her response. "My parents sacrificed everything to give me opportunities in America. Sending money home is my honor, not my burden." Charles studied the written words, struck by their dignity. "That's admirable. Family loyalty is important." "It's everything," Maya wrote. "Family means you never face the world alone." After dinner, Alexander showed Maya the family's private art collection, translating the stories behind various pieces. Maya's responses, written in her notebook and shared with the group, revealed an understanding of art that surpassed most museum curators. As the evening wound down, Charles asked to speak with Maya privately. Alexander started to object, but Maya placed a gentle hand on his arm and nodded her consent. In Charles's study, surrounded by first edition books and family photographs spanning generations, the billionaire patriarch and the deaf janitor sat across from each other in leather chairs that had witnessed countless important conversations. Charles wrote his first question in Maya's notebook. "Why do you love my son?" Maya's response was immediate and heartfelt. "Because he sees my silence as something beautiful instead of something broken. Because he learned my language instead of expecting me to change. Because he loves Maya, not who he thinks I should become." Charles wrote, "What do you want from our family?" Maya's answer surprised him. "Nothing except the chance to love Alexander without you hating me for who I am." Charles stared at the written words for a long moment. "Maya," he said aloud, knowing she could read his lips, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your character based on your circumstances. That was wrong." Maya wrote, "You were protecting your son. I understand. I would do the same. Would you accept our blessing for your marriage?" Maya's eyes filled with tears as she wrote, "With gratitude and respect, yes." Charles stood up and extended his hand. When Maya took it, he spoke slowly and clearly so she could read his lips. "Welcome to our family." 6 months later, the wedding of Alexander Blackstone and Maya Santos took place in Central Park, where they had spent countless hours learning to communicate without words. The ceremony was conducted in both spoken English and American Sign Language, with Maya's deaf friends from the community center sitting alongside Manhattan's financial elite. Victoria Blackstone's toast was given in sign language, the result of months of study inspired by watching her son's love transform not just his life, but the entire family's understanding of communication and connection. Charles hired Maya as a creative consultant for Blackstone Industries, where her visual communication expertise revolutionized their marketing approach and led to a 40% increase in client engagement. And Alexander learned that the most profound conversations of his life would always be the ones that happened in the space between words, where love spoke louder than voice ever could. The boy who had everything discovered that he had been missing the most important thing of all, someone who loved him not for what he could say, but for who he chose to be when words weren't necessary. If Maya and Alexander's love story has shown you the beauty of connection beyond words, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with everyone who believes that love truly knows no barriers, because the most powerful communication happens from the heart.